good morning, Guido. It's always, a huge joy, huge honor for us to be in touch with you. We are very grateful for you to be with us once again. Of course, this is a gesture of generosity of your part, and this is the right word, the generosity of sharing your precious time with us. You know everything about this program. We have been here twice before, so this makes things easier. This is a group composed by business and thought leaders of many of Brazil's leading companies and institutions, and most of them are at the C-level or on boards of directors. And as you know, under this leadership program, we are debating critical issues every month based on a book that is selected to serve as the framework for our discussions. And on top of that, we have these special sessions with leading thinkers like yourself, who are our guides to think better about these subjects and, of course, to act accordingly. And Guido, you don't need introductions, but for the sake of starting this event in a kind of more formal way, I would like to highlight to all participants that Professor Dr. Guido Palazzo is Professor of Business Ethics at HEC Lausanne, University of Lausanne in Switzerland. And Guido is the author of this beautiful and recently released, I would say essential book, The Dark Pattern, The Hidden Dynamics of Corporate Scandals. And Professor Palazzo has studied business administration and philosophy at the University of Bamberg in Germany and wrote his PhD in political philosophy at the University of Marburg, also in Germany. And his research has been on corporate responsibility in global supply chains, the mechanisms of unethical and ethical decision making in organizations, the fight against organized crime, and the transformational power of storytelling. And just to conclude, Professor Palazzo has worked with numerous companies in Europe, Asia, and also in the US on ethics and compliance. He is well known for an amazing online course on Coursera that I actually took part years ago, and it was a fantastic experience, named Unethical Decision Making in Organizations, which so far have been taken by about 35,000 people and counting. And he is widely known for his studies on globalization and human rights. So Guido, I'm going to kick off this conversation with 4 or 5 questions, and then open for other questions from the members of our group, whom I also greet and thank very much for being here. And by the way, as a surprise for all of you who are attending this session will receive an ebook copy of Guido's book after our session, which of course is a wonderful gift. So Guido, thank you very much once again. I'm going to jump to the first question and then just leaving the room for you, okay?
Okay. And thanks for the very kind words.
Thank you very much. It's from our hearts. So, Guido, before we dive into your wonderful book, I would like to start off with a broader question, given that you are a profound expert on ethics. And interdependence and the ability of establishing a mutually beneficial long-term relationships are at the very core of ethics. And all over the world, we have become increasingly interconnected over the last decades. So more than ever, of course, our day-to-day actions and decisions, they can affect humans and other forms of life on the other side of the planet and vice versa. But this increased interdependence doesn't seem to have been followed by an increase in awareness, in our awareness as human beings to feel connected with the other people and nature. So in fact, we unfortunately are seeing a growing polarization and fragmentation both within and among countries in the past few years, which of course has intensified in the last months with the return of Donald Trump to office. So how do you see this issue? Are you hopeful that we can change our current collective route of fragmentation and develop a more ethical and healthier way of living together, of coexisting here on Earth?
I was just this morning teaching a group of executives about the climate crisis. And when I talk about the multiple crises we are in at the moment. And when I talk about this topic, I always tell them, well, the real crisis is not technical, is not resource-oriented. The real crisis is a storytelling crisis. We have lost the narrative. We don't believe in the kind of ideology anymore that we have had globally the last 30, 40, 50 years. So this free market ideology that started in the US and became then the blueprint for markets and societies around the world. So just to give you a few key of these belief system, we believe that free markets are the best solution for human problems. So governments should not regulate or should regulate not much, because governments are a problem, not a solution. We believe that humans are by default egoistic, homo economicus. We believe that the human behavior is characterized by fighting, not by cooperation. We believe that consumption makes us happy, that growth is always possible and always good. So it's a series of things that we have been teaching in business schools around the world for decades, and that has been used by politics to make decisions. And we start to not believe this anymore. But we don't have anything else to believe in. We have no alternative. Just think about 1989, when the communist system collapsed. They, in a way, had an easier job in Eastern Europe. And they would just say, well, we replace the belief in Marx by the belief in the market. So they took our belief system, and that also contributed to the globalization of neoliberalism. Now, what happens in a historical moment when the belief system of societies collapse? The Italian philosopher Gramsci once said that this leads to what he calls an interregnum. So it's a moment between two empires. One is dying, one is not yet there. And as a result, you see a lot of irrationalities. People behave irrational. People start to believe in conspiracy theories. People start to believe in whatever, because we humans want to believe in something. And if our big story is gone, we try to grab some other stories. So in a way, it doesn't concern me too much what we observe, because if you look back in history, we always had phases where societies were in crisis and then everything became irrational. But then this disappears by people building up a new narrative. And what we observe today is a fight between two new narratives. One is the environmental narrative, which I call Gaia. Right, so it's the Mother Earth, things are connected, animals have rights. So this kind of discussion. On the other side, you have Silicon Valley that says power to the rich, democracy is not a good system. We have to accelerate. We have to trust in technology. We have to fly to space and connect our brain to the machine. So it's two very different stories, and they compete right now about who is winning. And the Trump government is putting in place more or less this high-tech narrative. And it's anti-democratic, and it's in a lot of aspects, it's highly dangerous. So this fuels the polarization. And how it will end, we don't know, but I'm optimistic, because in the end, all these phases of irrational behavior at one point stopped, and people turned back to behaving in a more decent way and getting back on track with their societies. So to look into history is often very good, to not be too concerned about the present.
Yes. And Guido, the author, Fritjof Capra, Fritjof Capra, and he used it to say that our crises actually are different facets of a single crisis, which is a crisis of perception. So it's a crisis of perception. And by the way, next week we're going to speak with an anthropologist who has written a book titled Why We Believe. So the main message is that for the believer, the belief is not a belief, is reality. And that's the problem, So that's the root of the problem. But now moving to your book, Guido, this is, of course, the result of extensive work in the field of business ethics that have been followed, as you know, and that you have been that you have pioneered. We can say that over the last decades. So, my first question is, what did you learn from writing your book? In other words, what were the key takeaways from delving deeper into the dynamics that cause corporate scandals? What was surprising for you?
Well, when we look at corporate scandals, what we normally assume automatically is that if there's something bad that is done, whatever bad is in the particular case, we automatically assume it must be because there are bad people. So there are people with character problems who want to enrich themselves and they don't care about others and they just go for it. So we try to explain it with what the Americans call the bad apple theory. And companies very often react by just firing a few people and then claim that now everything is solved because the bad people are gone. But when you dig into the scandals, and that's what we did. So we went to the court documents, thousands of pages, to investigative journalists. We spoke with people who were there when it happened. But when you dig into the details, you see that this story doesn't make sense. It doesn't hold, because in a lot of cases, you have thousands of people who are participating in the wrongdoing. Take the special case of Wells Fargo, biggest American bank, which at one point had 100,000 salespeople committing fraud on their customers. 100,000 people. How do you explain this by character? That would be very strange. What kind of bank will hire just 100,000 criminals, or what kind of HR department would do that? And what criminal people would say, I have to work for Wells Fargo because that's the place where I can be who I am? No, that doesn't work. You don't understand none of these scandals, be it Boeing or Wells Fargo or Volkswagen, just by looking at the character of a few people. But if it's not people that explain what happens, what is it? And this is what we try to do in the book. We argue that is what drives people's behavior normally is not who we are, but the context in which we are. If you put all of us into a high pressure context like Wells Fargo's sales department, we probably would have done the same as they did. So it's normally good people or average people doing the bad things because they are in badly designed organizations who push them towards the limit. The most surprising thing for me when I was looking at these scandals is that, well, you hear about these scandals in the news very often as a kind of very technical story. So Volkswagen created a diesel technology that was fraudulent. Boeing had a software solution for the aerodynamics problems of the 737 MAX, and they crashed. Theranos was cheating with their blood testing machine, and so on. So it's all technical stories. But when you look behind the surface, what you see is immense human suffering. People burning out, people killing themselves, people being desperate, people feeling shame and guilt for what they do, and being treated rudely and in a toxic environment. That is what you normally don't see. It's the silent human suffering in the background. That's the first thing that surprised me. The second thing that surprised me is that when this human suffering is happening, when you observe your colleague being humiliated, being harassed, being shut down when they speak up, you remain silent. You do nothing. You wait for someone else to help. And because everyone believes someone else should help, no one helps. There is no solidarity in these toxic corporate cultures because everyone tries to survive for themselves. So these were the two things that I found the most surprising. And when we might talk about solutions at a later point in this conversation, but I think this is the leverage point where you can start to think, how do we avoid these things?
Fantastic, Guido. And please, friends, raise your hands to ask questions. Feel free. Let's make use of this opportunity. But I'd like to go deeper a little bit, Guido, in this contextual pressure, because you write in your book that, quoting, context can be stronger than reason and stronger than values. It can distort people's perception of reality to such an extent that they can become ethically blind. So at the end, you end up with a sort of 9 building blocks of a context that paved the way for serious ethical problems in organizations, which are a rigid ideology, toxic leadership, manipulative language, corrupting goals, destructive incentives, ambiguous rules, perceived unfairness, dangerous groups, and a slippery slope. So these are the building blocks that are, of course, mutually reinforcing system. So are there 2 or 3 factors that we might consider most decisive to cause a corporate scandal? Or is there a kind of a hierarchy of relevance among them, or are they all together?
I have 2 types of answers to this question. One is that I would give to managers in organizations, and one that I would give to politicians who design systems. The main driving force of all this wrongdoing in our analysis is ideology, is shareholder value maximization. It's this pressure on leaders and organizations to have an ever better story to tell about the success of a company every 3 months. And if you don't have that story, you get fired as a CEO or as a CFO. You have to leave. And Nestle, they fired their CEO now for another reason, but the one they fired before, he was successful. He made profit. But shareholders said, this is not enough profit. We want more. So this ideology that is surrounding us, regardless of where we are, whether you're in Brazil, I'm in Switzerland, or you are in China, most of these elements hold. So that managers think, I need to maximize profit at any price. And this can lead to devastating decisions because they don't believe that ethics plays a role in their decisions. Take Boeing, just a simple, maybe the most clear case when it comes to ideology. The story of the 737 MAX crashes starts when in 1999, Harry Stonecipher becomes the CEO of Boeing, and he comes from Jack Welch. He's a member of the team of Jack Welch. And Jack Welch would do 2 things to increase shareholder value at GE, which would then, in the end, almost kill GE. He would cut cost brutally. He would fire 25% of the people in the first 4 years. He would then buy back shares. He would invest most of the profit of the company in buying their own shares. Why would you do this? Well, if there are fewer shares, the share price goes up. If your costs go down brutally, share value goes up. So with these 2 means, you can inflate the share value without any substance, without innovation, without good products, without nothing. You just inflate the share value. Harry Stonecipher comes to Boeing, and he does exactly the same. He fires 25% of the people in the first 4 years, including most of the most experienced and most expensive engineers. He buys back shares for such a high amount of money that there was not much money left to build a new airplane. And the result we know. So ideology is key. And there's the other element of ideology, that we believe innovation is disruption. Innovation means this, to smash things, to destroy everything, and to build something beautifully new on the debris of the destruction. Facebook and all the others, they explicitly claim this. And the law and moral rules become a part of what you need to smash, because otherwise you don't progress enough. So this is ideology. And if we want to reduce the risk of scandals, I think we need to have a serious conversation about what is the purpose of a company? What kind of legal framework do we give the company? But I don't normally tell this part managers, because then managers will react by saying, well, I cannot influence ideology, so I can do nothing, I'm fine. No, there's also a lot of things that go wrong inside the organizations, maybe driven by the ideology, but in the free will in the hands of managers. For instance, the key driver of all these scandals is a climate of fear. People are horrified by their own leaders. People think about their work on Sunday evening and think about Monday morning and have stomach pain. People burn out, people kill themselves, like in some of my cases, because of the horrible, toxic work environment. A German news magazine once described the climate at Volkswagen as North Korea without concentration camps. So it's a climate that is so horrible that people just cannot imagine to not obey orders. to not do what the leaders tell them. And now imagine you have this climate of fear, and you add a goal that people cannot achieve. You give them an impossible goal. Now, you cannot go to your leader and say, I cannot build this filter technology at Volkswagen, because you know that is the last thing you do in the company. You must find a solution. Not to find a solution is no option for you. Or think about another scandal we discuss in the book, the doping scandal of Lance Armstrong in the Tour de France, where he was winning 7 times with the help of a drug called EPO. You know, if you're a professional cyclist, you know exactly that you will never, ever even survive in the Tour de France, not just winning, survive, stay in the main group if you do not use the drug. It's impossible because there are too many mountains. So you have fear and you have goals you cannot achieve. And then you add a third thing, and I think the combination of these 3 is decisive. The third thing is you give your organization unclear rules. It's not clear what right and wrong is. You observe, for instance, that someone who is a super successful salesperson is at the same time doing doubtful things when it comes to compliance. But because that person is successful, they let him do it. They tolerate his rule breaking. Or you have a highly toxic leader who burns out his people, it's mainly men, and you let him do it because he seems to be successful. He achieves his numbers. And you don't want to replace someone who achieves his numbers and then maybe have someone who does not achieve the numbers. It's not good for you as a leader either. So you let these people do. But what you also do when you let people do these things is you create a climate in which you signal to everybody that rules are up to interpretation. Rules are not clear. There's a gray zone. And in this gray zone, you can do many things as long as you are successful. So you have fear. You have goals you cannot achieve, but you know that if you achieve them, it's fine if you achieve them in a shady way. So in the combination, and you said this, Alexandra, it's the combination of these 9 elements that makes a context so powerfully distorted and dangerous for corporate scandals. And these 3 I would highlight as the ones managers can really control and avoid.
Wow, incredible. Thank you so much, Guido. I'm going to start the questions here from our group. So I'm going to hand over to Patricia, please. Please, Patricia, feel free.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much, Professor, for being here. You know, I loved your book. And
thank you.
And we have exchanged some messages in the past. I'm the one that you worked at Uber and Google, by the way. I did work at the tech industry for 5 years after the change of the management of Uber. And now I'm back into insurance, which is a great thing because after having been through that process, I have a completely different view, and I'm agreeing more and more with you on the ideology and all of that. But I continue to work in compliance and for American companies. And I think, the will to change things in corporations, I see that there are some departments that actually have the potential to try and start the change from within. And I think the compliance department is one of them. Of course, everyone can start, but I think compliance is at a unique position, depending on the support that we have, to actually start those conversations. And I wanted to hear from you a little bit more about citing the example of Wells Fargo, because Wells Fargo had that big scandal that you describe in your book. And then after that, they had many other scandals. Mm-hmm. So everything continued, which reinforces the need for something else to happen. What is that something else, and how can we actually start the change from within in all levels of the organization? And let me just add that I love the epilogue where you say that the fact that we have to look at the context doesn't exonerate the actual behavior of the individuals. But of course, we cannot put all the blame in the individuals. I wanted to hear you on that, from that perspective. What else can we do from within and talking to the people and at all levels of the organization?
I would give 2 answers. The first answer is, once you had a scandal, like Wells Fargo, like Boeing, if you really want to change and to avoid that this happens again, you have to do some soul searching. You have to ask yourself, how did our culture, how our leadership, the way we treat people, how did this create the mess we are in? Because if you don't ask yourself those questions, you just fire 3 people who have broken the law, and then you think, let's look forward, not backward anymore. And that's what they do, and that's why it repeats. Even Boeing is not changing. I mean, we had this door falling from the sky and when this happened, the same points were made by people from inside. They said, we cannot speak up, our goals are not achievable, we are under immense pressure. So the company did not challenge itself, which is maybe human. After something horrible that happens, you want to look forward, not backward, but it is a missed opportunity. A company that did this better, and we described this in the book, is Novartis, the Swiss pharmaceutical company. When they had their big corruption scandal, they totally changed their perception of what compliance is. And they called this human risk management. And they said, we have to have not just a legal understanding of compliance, but a psychological and ethical one. So they bring these 3 things together, and they train their managers in social psychology and in ethics, so that they have a broader perspective. And they do this top down, sending signals from the board down the hierarchy that this is important. But it only works if compliance is in the driving seat and has the power and has the link and the ear of the CEO, which normally is not the case. Normally, the CEO thinks about compliance only after they paid $1 billion in fine, or 2 billion, or 3 billion. Then suddenly ethics and compliance is important. Before that, it's not the case. So I think a scandal is an opportunity that we should use as a company, but sadly, it rarely happens. But I agree with you, compliance has a huge leverage. It can make things change if they let them do it.
Yes, exactly. And I think talking more, not only on the legal compliance side, not just doing what's legal, but doing what's right, which is not always heard. But yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Julio, please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Guido, for being here with us. It's an honor. And I haven't read your book, but I read Why They Do It. And I always try to ask, from people like you that saw so many cases like these, I'm thinking of a practical point of view here. If these ethical problems, they come from more from disorganization than bad intent. So what is the 1 or 2 practical things that leaders, in your point of view, what you recommend to leaders, what they should do to keep that disorder from turning into misconduct? Because and it's besides the eject button, right? What do you suggest?
First of all, I think Why They Did It is an amazing book. But it does something different from my book. It investigates scandals where you have 1 or 2 people at the top who break the law. And this is not what, so I always say there are cases that are not following the pattern that we described, or only partially. And this is cases like Bernie Madoff, Wirecard. So cases where you really have some conscious criminal activities of a few people who deceive the whole organization and try to run away with money. So this is different to a degree. Now, what can leaders do? The main problem that all these organizations have is that no one dares to say anything about problems. There's no speak up culture. And people who, in all these scandals I investigate, there are people who try to speak up, always. They are the courageous people who have value conflicts and who say it. And it is always the same that happens. They get pushed back, they get threatened, they get demoted, they get kicked out, and in some cases even legally sued and destroyed. And if I am working in a company where I observe this, why would I be the next one to say something critical? Right? I will shut up, because speaking up is super dangerous. So, and that leads to the fact that something that could be stopped early becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. Patricia mentioned Uber. Uber had many scandals, but one of these scandals they had was sexual harassment. And you have young engineers, one case where a young engineer starts to work at Uber, and the very first day she works there, she gets harassed by a superior. She does the right thing. She goes to HR and tells HR about it. What does HR do? They tell her, well, he'd never done this before. He's a high performer. We can do nothing against him, but we can offer you to change department. She changes department. What happens? She gets harassed by a boss. She goes to HR. HR tells her, oh, he never did this before. He's a high performer. We can do nothing, but you can change department. She changes department another time. She gets harassed again because that's the culture. She goes to HR, and HR says, listen, it's the third time that you come to us. Maybe you should ask yourself, how did I provoke all these things? So you blame the victim. And if you have that kind of culture, speak up is simply not possible anymore. And sooner or later things go wrong in a high pressure context. And if you cannot say that, if there's no way of voicing concerns, problems become bigger and bigger and bigger. So the most important thing a company must do, in my view, is create a culture where people speak up. But they don't speak up just because you tell them to speak up. That would be too easy. They will observe what happens to someone who spoke up. Are they protected? Is their career over, or do they, despite this, get promoted? How does my leader talk about someone who spoke up? And it's the stories that go around that make you decide whether you want to speak up or not, or whether you think the risk is too high. There should be no risk for speaking up. And when I say speaking up, I mean going to your superior. I don't mean whistleblowing. That's a different thing. Whistleblowing is what people do when they have no other option anymore. The last exit. Speaking up is go to my boss and say what you want me to do is not possible or is against our code. If you cannot do this, the organization is in a big mess. But how do you create a speak up? Well, you have to train managers to listen. It's a skill set you need. You have to train people to speak up. It's also a skill set that you need. You have to create a structure in which this is protected. There's one company we cite in the book, Stora Enso in Finland. They have installed an anti-retaliation process where the person who spoke up is accompanied for 2 years by compliance and HR so that they are protected against subtle retaliation by their superiors. And this is a very powerful signal to the organization. We protect you if you speak up. That's one point. The other point, what makes people speak up is they observe that in their environment, talking about ethical problems is normal. How do you achieve this? You normalize ethical conversations as a leader. You engage with your team in discussion on values, on scandals. You ask the team, do you think this could happen here? If not, why not? How can we be so sure? You talk about your own dilemma situation. So you normalize talking about ethics. There was an interesting result of one of the surveys that Novartis did when they had installed their new system. They found out that in departments where people said, we regularly engage in ethical conversations, where exactly the departments where speaking up happened more often. Mm-hmm. So it's combined. You need to create this culture where it is desired and promoted and risk-free to speak up.
Very interesting, Guido, because we have had a conversation with Tobias Turenson, which is a common friend of ours. He came to Brazil and even at our home, and he said something interesting. He said, look, a culture of silence is not a culture where people don't speak, but they don't speak about the important things. So there's a lot of noise in conversations, but not about the real critical things. So there are jokes and there are things, but it seems normal on the surface, but it's not. So I think it's interesting because when we think about the culture of silence, we think everybody's not talking, but they're talking, but not about the relevant things. So it's interesting. And just by the way, we also had conversations with Eugene Soltz, and he said that the author of Why They Do It, and he said that in his recent research, he found a strong correlation between sexual harassment and financial fraud. So these things they come in a kind of a package, right? So
and that's what I also always say in all my scandals. When there was some compliance problems occurring, there was always sexual harassment in parallel. And in a way, it's logic, because the people who think they can violate one type of rules, they also think they can violate the other type of rules. So I always, when I work with companies, I tell them, if you have a case of sexual harassment, dig deeper. You probably will find something else in addition to that. But compliance is very often organized in a way that the harassment cases are given to HR. So you don't investigate anymore yourself. So you cannot go deeper because you have given it to someone else. And HR doesn't investigate compliance problems. So you will never see these additional risks if you are designing the process like that.
Fantastic. Andrea, please.
Hi, Professor. I'm the one who invited you to my podcast here in Brazil.
Oh,
yeah. So we're
looking forward to it
in October. Thank you so much for that. I wanted to get your take on destructive incentives, one of the key pillars on your book. And when I read about that, I thought about Jerry Colonna, a recent interviewee of mine in the podcast. He wrote a book called Reunion, in which he talks about the concept of otherness, meaning that a greedy leader gets impersonal. So he doesn't see the other person or the other people,
yes,
as pieces. And Colonna also talks about the challenge for these kinds of leaders to understand enough as a concept. So I wanted to listen to your take on these two concepts related to destructive incentives, please.
Yes, and that was maybe the fourth element if I had to highlight four important elements of the dark pattern. When you think about Jack Welch again, when he entered the role as CEO of GE, he said, in any kind of team, there are high and low performers. And I don't want low performers. He called low performers dead wood. Dead wood. At McKinsey, they're called value destroyers. So he said, we use the Gauss curve, the normal distribution curve, and we must every year, every manager on every level of the organization must fire 20% of the people as dead wood, the pieces that you mentioned. So you cannot say, my team and I, we worked so hard this year, we overperformed. No, you still have to apply the curve. You have to fire 20%. And what you create is a culture where people fight each other. There's this other famous example of Lehman Brothers, the CEO of Lehman Brothers, the only bank that went bankrupt in the financial crisis. He used to give his traders plastic knives, and he told them, you must cut the throat of your enemy. Go and cut their throat. And the enemy was not Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan. The enemy was your colleague next door. Imagine that. You can only survive in this world if someone else goes down. It's Darwinism. It's pure Darwinism. It's struggle for survival. What you destroy is collaboration, because people, why would they share information? Why would they collaborate? They know I can only survive if someone else doesn't. It destroys any kind of culture. So this is one dark side of incentives. It's Highlander culture. I also call it Hunger Games culture. It's like in the Hunger Games, right? I win if you lose. And the other element of incentives is that you very often see companies giving their people too narrow incentives. At Boeing, they had two KPIs, speed and cost. Yes, including the board, of course. They had two KPIs, speed and cost. So they had to build the 737 MAX as fast as possible and as cheap as possible. And that's what they did. And then you have problems. But because of the culture of fear, you cannot talk about this, you hide them, and then they crash. So if you give people very narrow incentives, and they have fear, and they have the stress of these goals they cannot achieve, and they have unclear rules, well, they make compromises, more and more compromises, always darker shades of gray, and they do not see the moment when this compromise becomes too dark, because it's a slippery slope. So incentives play a key role in making us blind for important aspects and in creating this in-fight culture inside the company. And the sad thing is that research in HR showed that that performance does not even distribute like that in a company. There is no Gauss curve in reality. Performance normally distributes very simple. You have a few star performers and the rest is more or less on the same level. That's it. That's the story. But as soon as you develop tools to evaluate people, of course, you find low performers and then you kick them out. And if you survive this exercise, you're not happy because you know that next year it's happening again, or in 6 months, like at Enron. And then it might be you. You have constant stress and fear. So it's devastating. And companies nonetheless keep doing it. They keep using the curve. They keep firing people. They treat them like commodities. And that is probably also leading back to the example, Alexandra, you gave at the very beginning of this talk when I arrived. People as commodities that you can just get rid of. Or as the CEO of Adidas, who almost destroyed the company with his cost-cutting program, he called people slack and fat. We have too much fat in the company. We have to reduce fat and slack. This is such an anti-humanist language, and still it works. People do it and keep doing it.
The recently appointed CEO of Unilever, right, has said about the same thing.
Yes.
And if I may, Guido, it's even a wrong notion of Darwinism, because the state-of-the-art understanding of evolution shows that cooperation is actually far more important for social creatures like us to survive, actually, than competition. So they even get the message wrong from the scientific perspective. But anyway.
Yes, and also from us, if I may add this, Alexandra, because the business schools, we teach competition. All the courses that you get in a business school is competition. You will hear about Michael Porter, who says a company is surrounded by 5 enemies, 5 dangerous forces, and you have to fight back against customers, competitors, government. They're all your enemy because they want something from you. So we teach competition, but we rarely teach collaboration. And imagine a business school in which we would focus on collaboration. What kind of different organizations we could create by just giving people different toolboxes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hannah, please.
Hi, Professor Palazzo. We also met a couple of years ago in Takeda in Munich. You were invited by my dear colleague Evelyn Lemaire to our event, and we worked for some videos also for our values campaign. You probably remember that. You recorded some videos for us in Zurich. I'm based in Boston. But my question, and you mentioned the slippery slope, it was related to slippery slope, because this is something that I think it's quite tricky to detect, to early detect. But it's our earliest sign that we need to do something. After you mentioned Boeing, that time, I remember later I was studying more the case, and I think between the change of leadership that you mentioned and the first plane crashed, it's more than 15 years. So it took like 15 years to become an external scandal. And how can we help leaders to see those subtle, small changes in our culture, in our environment, that we should be attentive of? Because this is, I think, what's challenging for us, in my case as an ethics and compliance professional, to ensure that we can help leaders to see it, because we start to see some signs, but sometimes they feel like, no, we still have a strong culture, we still have a strong values basis in our company.
Yeah. I mean, the case, the fact that it takes so long, it's interesting. It's not always like this, but very often. And Boeing had 3 CEOs, one after another, who came from Jack Welch, who brought more stuff from this kind of management style into the company and slowly destroyed the culture. There's one thing I write in the epilogue of the book, that many companies have this kind of horrible culture that we describe, but they never have a scandal. So what's the difference? What is the moment when the scandal can happen? The moment is a crisis. You have a crisis situation. You cannot continue your success story anymore. Volkswagen needed to build this filter to enter the American market. They couldn't. Boeing needed an urgent answer to Airbus. Theranos had to fulfill expectations of their investors, and they couldn't. So you are in a crisis. You need to continue a success story, but you can't. And then the dark pattern leads to problems. As long as you are super successful, because everyone wants to buy your product, you can be very toxic and still it works, right? Because you don't need to break the law. Early warning signals, there are a lot. At one company where I once worked, they had a huge corruption scandal. And when I came in, they said, listen, the person organizing the big scheme of fraud, he was smoking in the office, and smoking was not allowed. It's a little thing, but it's something that shows this person was convinced that to him rules do not apply, right? Or some other early warning signal is the turnover rate of female leaders, because male leaders who are in a toxic work environment will normally react by saying, I have to go through this. This is normal. This is everywhere like this. And I have to be strong. Female leaders, especially younger female leaders, will tend to think, I don't have to take this shit anymore. I go somewhere else. This is enough. So whenever there is, and there's research showing that this difference, whenever there is a higher than normal turnover rate of female leaders, that's a warning signal. At Uber, female engineers percentage went down, I guess, from, I have forgotten the numbers, but it was something like 30% to 2%. So you see that they leave. So there is something wrong here, and you can investigate this. So there are a series of things you can see that go wrong early on. Just the compromise of not firing the salesperson who is successful with bad methods is a warning signal, because it means that very soon some others will use the same methods.
Wow, fantastic. Folks, we're going to the end of our session, but I'd like to ask 2 or 3 more questions to Guido. But before, Guido, if we may take a picture to register this moment, which is very special for us, please. So everyone who may please open the cameras, we appreciate. So count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Let me see. Just a second, please. Okay, perfect. And actually, Angela sent you a big hug. Our kid is with a strong fever this morning, so we have to make a choice among ourselves. So it's a pity, but that's life. And so Guido, I'd like to ask you a question, perhaps a different one, which is a connection between the miserable experience felt by most people in the corporate world and this scandal. So because we have seen record levels of employee disengagement, mental health problems, and high levels of unhappiness in the corporate world. A couple of years ago, for instance, we talked with John Clifton, which is the CEO of Gallup, and he mentioned that their survey regularly shows that only around 20% of employees are engaged worldwide, while the rest are either indifferent or detached, or even actively disengaged. And in addition, 2024 survey, also by Gallup, showed that less than 1 in 4 employees, 37% to be more precise, strongly agree that they are treated with respect at work, which is the lower level in all the survey records. So less than 40%. So is there a relationship between business ethics or a lack of it and this workplace misery or suffering? So are ethics and happiness at work 2 sides of the same coin?
Think about the role models that we use when we talk about successful entrepreneurs. For many years, it has been Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and people like that. Psychopaths. People who don't care about other human beings. We celebrate them as role models. We think this is how entrepreneurship works. So in a way, people at organizations very often come to the conclusion that if you want to be successful, you cannot be a leader who treats people with respect. You have to be rude, because only when there is fear and aggression, then they will be motivated, right? And many leaders have gone through this kind of socialization process where they were treated like this, and they think, yeah, this is management. And if I talk about ethics instead or treat people well, I am perceived as a weak leader. So I have to be like this. I always share the story of Volkswagen. The former CEO of Volkswagen, Ferdinand Piëch, when who was a psychopath creating a climate, horrible climate, when he wanted to see a new car that the engineers had built, he would come to the car and the engineers would stand around the car and he would open the door and close it, open it again and close it, and then fire the engineers if he didn't like the sound of the door. Like that, the same day they had to leave. And I was once telling this story to a group of managers of a car producer in the Nordics, in Northern Europe. And when I told them this story, they started to laugh. And I asked them, why do you laugh? This is not funny. They said, we also had a CEO doing that, firing engineers because he didn't like the sound of the door. And guess where he came from? He came from Volkswagen. He had learned his job with Pirch. So is he a psychopath as well? Probably not. He is someone who is trained to think that this is how you motivate people. So we need other role models. We need to engage leaders more in this discussion on respect and dignity, because very often they do not even realize that they make people suffer because they are so busy with other stuff and they don't realize it. We have to show it to them. The bully very often doesn't see himself or herself as a bully. They see themselves as a bit of a rough manager, but a good manager by and large. So we have to find new role models and to talk about these new role models. That's super important.
Wow. And Guido, this earlier this year we had a wonderful conversation with Peter Senge from the Fifth Discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that struck me is that he said, look, for you to create an environment with dialogue, you cannot have hierarchy. So hierarchy is the antidote for dialogue. And also if you see others as rivals and not as colleagues. So perhaps this is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to speak up and have dialogues in organizations. So that came to me as a kind of perhaps an insight of the relationship or potential relationship between business ethics and the organizational structure of companies. Because in the past few years, we have seen the growth of a number of companies with decentralized structures, which are organized as a kind of a network of self-managed cells or teams, and replacing, the traditional pyramidal structure. So you see Buurtzorg in the Netherlands, you see W.L. Gore in the US, and so on. Of course, this is not mainstream; these are exceptions. But and do you believe that this perhaps this new narrative for business, which is more purposeful, humane, stakeholder-oriented, is more likely to be well received and adopted by this kind of business that work on non-traditional organizational structures?
I would say we need to reorient our ideas of organizations away from hierarchies to democracies. Because we take for granted that an organization needs a leader. But why? Why can we not organize things differently? We don't teach different types of organizations normally. We don't teach holacracy or whatever it is that is available. We teach charisma, leadership, how leaders motivate followers. It is all assumed for granted that, of course, an organization needs hierarchies. And maybe it needs a bit of hierarchy, but it can work much better probably with much more democracy. Cooperatives can be super successful, and in Switzerland and Italy and some other countries around that are investigated, there's so many very powerful cooperatives that do not have these kind of leadership structures, and they are successful. So we need a bit more of imagination how we think about organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yes, fantastic. Silvia, would you like to ask a question because you raised your hand?
Yeah, I would like to ask you, you mentioned that Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg were seen as the role models today. But my question is, what is beneath that? Because there is a more base cause as to why these people are chosen as role models, and I think unless we address that, we can't really think of what other people can be role models.
There are a lot of sources for this. One is how we understand innovation. Innovation, as I mentioned, as disruption. destroying, smashing, ignoring what's there because you have this new thing that is so much better. But you can also, and this is what I right now do with regards to Silicon Valley, you can trace all this thinking about leadership back to fascism, even further down to strongman theories that came up in the early 20th century, where people thought we need this powerful absolute person at the top who inspires us and leads us to the best of all possible worlds. This kind of thinking that then inspired fascism, Mussolini and Hitler, it has traveled to management theories today. And it now shows its face in Silicon Valley, where you have Elon Musk showing the Nazi salute, Peter Thiel saying, well, democracy, we don't need that because freedom works without democracy. You have all these very strange things. You have Mark Andreessen, who explicitly refers to Italian fascists as his saints. So it's in the open now, the links to what has been there as the most extreme form of leadership models. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg has given his kids names like August and Maxima, August following Augustus because he admires Roman emperors. I mean, this autocratic thinking of these people, it's out in the open, and it's highly dangerous.
Wow. And Guido, please, if we have time for the last question, this very quick one.
Of course. I mean, I have time. I came late, so if you have time, I have time.
I would have questions for you for all over the day and the week. It's wonderful to listening to you. But we have many board members here in this group, Guido, including independent directors of large companies. So in your opinion, what is the role of the boards of directors in, let's say, steering their companies so that they can become more ethical, stakeholder-oriented, purposeful? Because at least in my view, sometimes the board is part of the problem, not of the solution, because they put a lot of pressure and sometimes short-term pressure on the C-level and on the management team. And so how can independent directors support their companies moving towards a kind of an organizational model and a business model in which human well-being and environmental sustainability are ultimate goals along with financial results?
In all the scandals that I investigated, the board was doing nothing. And they were surprised by what happened because they did not see it coming. And the reason why they don't see it coming is that they didn't ask that kind of questions that would have enlightened them, right? Most boards do not even have a compliance committee. Most boards do not have a direct link to the chief compliance officer who reports to the CEO, not to the board. So I think the first thing a board needs to do is create the structural processes to get the information they need to evaluate the things we just discussed. Then the second thing is you need to ask about culture. You need to investigate the leadership culture in the organization. What kind of CEO do you appoint, right? If you know that this person is a psychopath because he behaved most of the time, it's a he. In my scandals, it's almost never a woman, interestingly. If he behaved like a psychopath in other corporations before, why do you choose that person? Right? Yeah, he might have been successful there for a while. Think about the guy who was hired by Adidas as the CEO to do cost cutting there. He was known to be a very bad leader in the place we had been before, and he, of course, cut costs there, but he also destroyed creativity and made people leave the organization who were important for the organization. And what happened at Adidas? The same. So you cannot be surprised. If you hire that person, you can see it coming. So why don't you hire someone who is not a psychopath, who is not a narcissist, who listens, who is caring for people, who is thinking broader with a broader vision and not just focusing on costs or whatever. So the people you choose and the question you ask those people you choose afterwards, that is your role. And this is how you can see it coming. Are the goals achievable? Think about Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo was 4 times more successful in sales than any other bank in America. Why does no one in the board ask, how do we do this? How is that possible? It's more or less the same salespeople, more or less the same processes, the same products, but we are 4 times better than everyone else. How is that possible? No one asked that question. Theranos. How can you build this magic machine for blood tests where all the experts say it's not possible? But no one in the board asked, how do you do it? So we could go on and on. Credit Suisse, over a period of 10 years before they collapsed, they were given 32 billion Swiss francs in bonus. They were paying 11 billion in fine and were making 31 billion in loss. They were paying more bonus than they were earning profit, not even looking at the fines. How is that possible? What was the board doing? How could they not ask questions about the total disconnect between bonuses and performance? No one asked any question. So I think boards have to do some soul searching as well about the kind of questions they want to ask people who make decisions in organizations, because otherwise you are blind. You don't see it coming.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Guido. Once again, on behalf of this group, we'd like to deeply thank you for your generosity of taking your time to be with us. So this
My
was
pleasure.
for sure, once again, a memorable occasion for us. And of course, it will be a privilege to hopefully meet you once again at some point in the future. Keep trying, huh?
With pleasure. Thanks for having me, for your questions, and for doing the right thing.
Thank you
Goodbye.
so much, Guido. Thank you.
Thank you
everyone.
so much. Bye-bye.
Great to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.